thin air, speed, the absence of any flaw. Ben Tennyson came back to himself, somewhere in the upper atmosphere of a world he did not know, falling fast, the Omnitrix screaming an alert code he had never heard in 6 years of wearing the device. The sky around him was the wrong color. One of the moons on the horizon was the wrong size. Below him, 2,000 feet down, through cold, thin air that tasted like a museum with no roof, a battle was happening on the bones of a dead civilization. He had been in his living room. One moment, there was a flaw. The next, there wasn't, because something had torn open the space between his universe and this one. Not with light, the way dimensional breaches almost always announced themselves, but with a pressure in the air, and a sound like an exhale from something the size of the universe itself. And then the floor was gone, and the walls were gone, and the boundary between everything he knew sealed behind him like a scar. The Omnitrix was recalibrating. He could feel it on his wrist, the watch running the alert code, it reserved for dimensional instability cycling hard through alien registers. It had no business mapping onto whatever the physics of this place were. The device had been built to function in any environment in the known universe. Whether any of that applied to a universe that was not the known one was apparently a question Azimuth had not gotten around to. Below him, ruins on a geological scale. Stone, colonnades the size of city blocks, crumbled and split into enormous sections. Dust that had been a civilization once, the bones of it still visible in the shapes of the collapse, archways and towers and broad avenues running between structures that had once been the scale of cathedrals. A dead world. Whatever had killed it had done so long enough ago that the world had gone quiet about it. He caught the smell of it even through thin air, old rock and old carbon, and the specific absence of anything living in a place that had once been very alive. Not everything down there was quiet. The battle came to him in pieces as he fell. A figure in red and gold armor, the engineering on it passed anything he had seen on his Earth or off it, firing repulsor beams in gold streaks at something enormous and purple at the center of the field. A man in a dark tunic and red cape, sorcery unfolding from his hands in rings of burning orange that had no biological signature the Omnitrix could catalog. Kid in red and blue on a web line, fast and enhanced and narrating what he was seeing out loud. And at the center of all of it, the large purple figure moving through the chaos with the patient certainty of something that had decided none of this was a real obstacle. One of the gold repulsor beams had just been caught in a hand the size of a car door and held there, the beam dying against the palm. The Omnitrix pulsed, cycling through its database of over 1 million sapient species. The man in the cape, no entry. The kid, human adjacent and enhanced. The armored figure, human and technology augmented. And the enormous purple shape at the center, the one with the armored gauntlet housing 4 stones that pulsed in sequence, the one holding a plasma beam bare-handed, not in the database, not anywhere in it. A gap in a million-species archive that was not supposed to have gaps. He had approximately 6 seconds before the ground arrived. The one in the gold armor was losing Ben, hit the Omnitrix green flash. The transformation ripped through him in a fraction of a second, Tetramand DNA overwriting his genetic code, 4 arms spreading wide as his frame scaled to 12 feet, skin thickening over dense muscle that could uproot a freight car. 4 arms dropped the last 50 feet and hit the Titan dust, like a building coming down, driving all 4 palms into the enormous outstretched arm and stopping it cold. Howled. The stone beneath his feet cracked in a 2-meter radius from the impact. The force pressing through his Tetraman bone structure was not a truck. not a warship. Something on a different order entirely, calm and immovable, pressing against him the way a tide presses against cliffstone. 4 arms bent his knees and dug in. He held. The purple figure looked down. The expression on that face was something more deliberate than either. The armored gauntlet on its left fist held 4 stone cycling colors, blue and orange and red and a deep purple that registered as color but felt like pressure from across the arm. The face above it was doing the thing a strategist does at the moment, just before a calculation, making space in a model for something that was not supposed to be present in the field. "Okay, so that guy has 4 arms," said a voice from above the ruins, swinging in on a web line strained and still somehow functional, and he literally just stopped Thanos with them, and I'm SDLL, the weird one here. Thanos, that was the name, still not in the Omnitrix database. The man in the red cape had gone still. He was looking at the watch on 4 arms' upper left wrist, with an expression that had moved between 1 second and the next from tactical to something much older and more alarmed. His orange sorcery had quieted. He was studying the Omnitrix with the fixed attention of someone who has just found evidence that a foundational law has exceptions it was not supposed to have. That device, the sorcerer said, barely above a murmur, the dimensional signature. It's wrong for this universe. Whatever that is, it did not come from here. 4 arms did not take his eyes off Thanos. Little busy. Introductions later, Thanos stepped back 1 pace. Not retreat selection. He raised the gauntlet with no hurry, and the purple stone flared with something that was less a color than a directive, the power stone at full output, raw destructive energy at the fundamental level, force that does not distinguish between matter states. It directed into 4 arms' chest and hit like a wall. He went through a colonnade, then a second, a third structure, something that had stood in this particular arrangement of stone for 500 years before today, gave up and stopped. He came down in a heap of ancient rubble and titan dust, and lay there while the debris settled on him. He breathed. He got up. 1 arm at a time. Slow. The Tetraman frame was built to absorb impact, but Power Stone output at full delivery was a different category of absorbed than anything in 6 years of alien transformations, and his arms were shaking in a way they did not typically shake. He got his feet under him and stood up in the rubble. 12 feet of dented Tetramand, shaking ancient stone dust off 4 shoulders. Thanos watched this from across the ruined plain. The purple stone had returned to its resting glow. 1 degree of adjustment moved across the Mad Titan's face. No more than that. The recalibration of a strategist encountering a variable it did not account for. Not fear. Not urgency, something that cost more to spend than either. Before we get into what comes next, real quick, which character do you want to see? Show up somewhere completely unprepared for them, drop a name in the comments. I need to see it. Okay, let's keep going. The man in the red and gold armor touched down nearby. His faceplate was up. The face behind it was sharp and wary and brilliant in equal measure. The engineer's eyes scanning the Omnitrix with the focused intensity of someone who intended to understand exactly what he was looking at before deciding what to do about it. "Name," he said. "Universe, purpose." The Omnitrix beeped. Cool down. 10 seconds. 4 arms reverted. Green light receding, the 12 feet and 4 arms dissolving back into Ben Tennyson in jeans and a hoodie, standing in the dust of a dead alien world, 16 years old, and nobody in this universe with a file on him. The watch cycled its steady cooldown green on his wrist, still cataloging, building new entries against the gaps. The sorcerer in the red cape crossed toward the armored man without taking his gaze off the watch. "That device on his wrist," he said, quieter than a man in the middle of an active battlefield had any right to be. "It's extra-dimensional. I can feel the signature of it from here. Whatever he is, he did not come from this universe." The armored man looked at the sorcerer, then at the watch, then at Ben. "Great," he said. "We've got enough problems in this one." The kid in red and blue had dropped to a crouch on a piece of broken column at roughly eye level, watching Ben with an expression that moved between amazement and something close to recognition. He was roughly the same age as Ben, maybe a year off in either direction, doing the same impossible thing in the wrong place, at the exact wrong time. Ben straightened up. "Hi," he said. "I'm Ben." Thanos turned away. Ben would learn to read that move precisely over the next 3 days, and every time he misread it, the cost would be significant. This was not retreat. What the Mad Titan did was evaluate, stepping back 40 meters while the gauntlet's 4 stones cycled down to their resting glow, his attention moving across the field with the patience of something that had already decided the outcome and was giving the situation time to agree. The Time Stone was what he needed. Strange had it. The Mind Stone was in Vision's forehead on a different planet. Neither of those things was solved by fighting the teenager with the alien watch. He needed 2 stones. The ones in front of him were not stones. The Black Order moved in his place. Ben got 30 seconds. Tony had landed nearby, the red and gold armor still running the Omnitrix through every scan the faceplate could manage. It was coming back with nothing, and Tony was not the kind of person who accepted that gracefully. Name, universe, purpose. Ben Tennyson. Not this one. Accidental. The watch. Temporarily, the faceplate ran one more pass. Still nothing. Tony's jaw shifted in a way that said he was updating a model somewhere behind his eyes and did not like the result. "The most advanced piece of technology I've ever seen just told me nothing." "Yeah," Ben said, "that happens." Then Ebony Moore arrived. The telekinesis came as a wave rather than a strike, concentrated pressure moving through the ruins without visible source, the kind of attack that did not distinguish between what it hit as long as it hit hard. Strange's orange rings collapsed under the force. The sorcerer went backward into a column of shattered stone, and the column held him there. Moore's focus, keeping him pinned, while the tall, pale figure drifted down from the ruins above, with his hands open and his expression entirely composed. And the teenager hit the Omnitrix. XLR-8 materialized where Ben had been standing. The Kynixleran form was low to the ground and built for sustained speed rather than bursts, and at 500 miles per hour the body was less a shape than a direction with intent. The tail scraped a rooster tail of Titan dust into the light of those 2 pale moons. Tony tracked it by sound, a pitch-shifted whine against the ruin acoustics, because the visual was not useful at that velocity. Moore's telekinetic constructs were anchored to the stonework above Strange's position. XLR-8 hit the first anchor before Moore had finished processing the transformation, then the second, then the third. The constructs dissolved, and Strange dropped the last 2 feet in a controlled landing rather than a fall. Moore said, "Interesting. A biomechanical form shifter from outside this XLR-8 hit him at full speed." He came back out. Ben had never encountered Moore before, but he recognized the category. A figure that floats above a battlefield and applies force from a distance does not go down permanently from a single body strike. Moore emerged from the rubble with his composure intact, his telekinesis already restructuring into something more concentrated, no longer a wave. A column compressed and directed, pulling stone and structural metal from the ruin behind him and driving it forward as a single dense mass. 3 tons of Titan architecture aimed at whatever Ben was standing in. Ben was standing in Diamond Head. The Petrosapien body caught the column full force. The crystalline structure did what crystalline structures do under applied force. It fractured the impact along its internal geometry, bent the energy 90 degrees at every facet junction, split it into 6 discrete vectors, and fired them back outward simultaneously. The construct shattered. Every piece of stone and metal that had been forming the weapon reversed direction and landed on Ebony Maw instead. 3 tons of debris collapsing down into the space he occupied. Maw did not come back out. Strange was not watching the field. He was watching the Omnitrix in the aftermath of the refraction, with the expression he reserved for things that violated laws he had previously considered absolute. He had built his career identifying those violations. This one was in a different category from anything he had previously encountered. He crossed to Diamond Head, while the crystalline form held position at the field's edge. He reached toward it, not touching the Omnitrix itself, but the air around it, the dimensional echo it left in the space adjacent to sorcery. It doesn't belong in this universe. The physics are wrong. A pause. Over 1 million. A longer pause. And the strongest. The 16-year-old looked at him. Let's hope we don't need it. The outer perimeter was moving. Outriders sweeping around the ruin's eastern edge in a flanking formation, coordinated enough that Thanos had given a direction even from his holding position 40 meters back. Ben let Diamond Head revert, waited out the cooldown, and transformed again. Ghost Freak phased through the nearest ruin wall and was gone. Tony tracked an Outrider at the flank's forward edge as it stopped, turned, and drove into its own formation. Then a second. Then a third. The 3 that had been coordinating the push were now the problem at the center of it, and the rest of the column broke against the confusion. One turned on its wing commander, with the focused precision of something that knew exactly where the hinge point was. 2 minutes of internal disruption undid 10 minutes of advance. Tony landed near where Ben had been standing. "That was you." Ben's voice came from a possessed Outrider 30 meters to the left. "Yeah, useful, right?" Tony did not answer out loud. He was filing it the way he always filed unknowns, building a model at the back of his mind that he could pressure test when the immediate emergency gave him 10 seconds. The kid was not Avengers material. He was something without a category, and in Tony's experience the things without a category were either the best variable in the field or the worst one. He had not yet decided which. Spider-Man dropped from a web line onto a chunk of fallen column at the perimeter. Peter Parker's mask was half up, the way it went when he was processing something that broke the framework he had arrived with. "Okay, so you're literally just a kid with the most insane alien watch in any universe, and you're HALKING us." He pointed at Ben, who had fully reverted and was standing with the Omnitrix cycling cooldown green on his wrist. "Do you have a name? Do you have a base? Do you have like a team?" "Ben, kind of. Yes. Cool? Cool. Peter reached out a hand. "I'm Peter. I'm also just a kid. Technically. Parker." Tony's voice was flat. "Focus." Peter and Ben looked at each other for a moment. Same age, roughly, close enough that the difference did not matter. 2 teenagers in the middle of something enormous on a dead planet, and the absurdity of it passed between them in the space of 1 second without either of them having to name it. It was the only moment in what was coming that felt anything like that. Thanos' voice crossed the field without effort. Not raised. Thanos never raised his voice. You fight well for someone born in the wrong universe. He was looking at Ben, not at Strange, not at the armored genius to Ben's left, at the boy standing in the dust between 2 collapsed colonnades, the alien watch green on his wrist. That device, I can feel something in it from here. Something I have not encountered in any calculation. Then maybe that should scare you. A pause. Something moved in the Mad Titan's expression that was not quite dismissal. It should take more than a child's confidence to frighten me. He turned. The time stone was what he needed. Strange's position. The eye of Agamotto. Ben took a step forward. We're not done. Thanos did not look back. You are not the threat you think you are. A half-beat of silence yet. Then he was moving, and the distance between him and Strange was no longer distant enough. The plan was not complicated. Complicated plans had too many failure modes, and they were already standing inside one. Strange laid it out while Tony's suit catalogued threats and the Omnitrix cycled through standby. Mantis would place her palms on Thanos' temples and suppress him, psychically, not physically, which was the only category of suppression that had any effect on a being who could walk through a Stormbreaker strike to the chest. While she held, the others would work the gauntlet fingers, the mechanism, whatever it took to pull that thing off his hand before he moved on. Strange, Ben had a different thought. I have something better than a grab. Give me 30 seconds, Tony. We don't, I can freeze him. Not forever. 30 seconds frozen is 30 seconds to pull anything off his hand without him fighting for it. Strange went still, not processing, deciding. Clockwork. The sorcerer's attention shifted in a way that meant he was recalculating a variable entirely rather than just updating its threat value. Do it, he said. Mantis backs you the moment his field drops. They moved. Thanos saw the clockwork form and frowned. The transformation was unmistakable, even to a being who had traveled the known universe and catalogued most of what lived in it. A robotic body, gear-driven, mechanical in a way that was structural rather than merely technological. A crystal face backed by visible clockwork motion, a key winding out of the chest cavity that ticked with the sound of every second passing simultaneously. The Omnitrix sat embedded in the chest plate cycling. Thanos looked at the chronosapien form, the way a strategist looks at something absent from every calculation it has ever run. He had never encountered one before. The time field expanded outward from the robotic form in a radius. It was not light and not sound. It was the quality of the air changing, time thickening in the space between heartbeats, slowing the passage from one instant to the next, the way a current thickens when the channel narrows. Thanos' arm, rising to bring the gauntlet forward, decelerated. Not stopped, decelerated to a fraction of its speed, then less. The team hit him. Spider-Man's webs lashed across 3 fingers and anchored to the stonework below. Nebula drove her weight against the gauntlet's rim, one cybernetic hand gripping the edge. Star-Lord and Drax threw themselves at the arm from below, their combined mass a lever against the locked joint. Iron Man added thrust from above, repulsors firing against the direction of the hand. Mantis pressed her palms to Thanos' temples. He is in pain, she said, strained, holding. And he is very angry. Holding for 15 seconds, they were going to win. Star-Lord learned about Gamora. The information arrived from Nebula direct and without preparation because Nebula had never learned to deliver loss in the way people needed to receive it. Thanos had killed her, on Vormir. It had already happened before any of them had arrived on Titan. Peter Quill hit Thanos across the face. Once, twice, the time field shattered. Chronosapien time suppression is a field of intention, and the intention at its center had fractured under something that had nothing to do with power. Mantis's grip broke with it. Her palms came off the temples. Thanos' arms snapped forward with the full force it had been building against the field, the gauntlet flaring to full intensity. Everyone went down. The Omnitrix flashed cooldown. Clockwork reverted. Ben was on the ground in Titan dust, with one hand braced against the stone, watching Thanos cross the distance to Tony with the patience of something that has never needed to hurry. Tony was on one knee. The nano-armor had a blade wound from earlier, sealed at the edge but not healed, and Tony was bleeding through the seal in a way that said the seal was not going to hold. Thanos raised the gauntlet. The Power Stone flared purple. Ben hit the Omnitrix. Feedback. The conductoid form materialized between Tony and the incoming beam. The antenna tips and the tail node opened, and the Power Stone's output hit the conductoid center mass and flooded in. Not through in. Feedback's absorption nodes read energy in any form and took it regardless of source, regardless of magnitude. The form had absorbed a dwarf star-enhanced weapon in its own universe and redirected the output. It processed the Power Stone's output the same way. Intake, routing, amplification, the charge building in every node simultaneously until the body was glowing with it and the beam had stopped flowing from the gauntlet entirely. Feedback fired it back. The concentrated return hit Thanos in the center of his chest and drove him backward. 1 step, 2, 3 steps backward. On Titan, the Mad Titan, the battlefield went silent. No repulsors, no web lines, no sorcery. 1 full second of silence over the ruins of a dead world, while the purple glow faded slowly from the conductoid's antenna and the residual charge dissipated into the thin, cold air. Thanos looked at the conductoid. You absorbed a stone's output. Feedback's antenna tips were still lit, the last of the charge burning off. Thanks for the charge. 1 second. Thanos raised the gauntlet again, not the Power Stone. The Reality Stone caught the light, and its color was nothing like red in any way that red normally worked. The next feedback blast launched and dissolved 3 feet from its target, blooming into vapor that drifted upward harmlessly and then slowly became soap bubbles that caught the light of the 2 moons before they disappeared. Thanos turned the Reality Stone on feedback directly. The conductoid's form flickered, the antenna bent at angles that an antenna could not physically achieve. The energy nodes destabilized, their geometry rewritten in real time, the absorption pattern losing coherence as the structural logic beneath it was edited into something that could not function. He hit the Titan dust flat on his back, the Omnitrix running its emergency recharge sequence, and above him the 2 pale moons had not moved. Nothing about this planet cared what had just happened on its surface. Thanos stood over Tony. The wound, the blood tracking along the armor's edge from the blade site. Tony looked up and held the gaze. Thanos said nothing to him. He turned to Strange. Strange stepped forward. He had his hand at the Eye of Agamotto, the pendant where the Time Stone waited, and his expression was the expression of a man who had been expecting this precise moment and had not changed his mind about it since he first saw it coming in 14 million futures. He conjured the stone from the eye. He held it out. No, Ben said. Strange handed it over. Thanos took the Time Stone. 5 stones now glowed in the gauntlet settings. He turned toward the Space Stone function in his grip. You handed it to him. Ben was on his feet. Omnitrix still red with the recharge cycle. Why did you... It was the only way. The only way to what? He is going to Wakanda. He is going for the last stone. You handed him what he needed to take it. I know, then stop him. Strange looked at Ben, not as a threat assessment, not as an anomaly, as an equal or close enough that the distinction stopped mattering. 14,605 of them in every path where you used your apex form immediately, without the cost. Thanos still won. Everyone, or something worse, replaced him. A pause. There is one path where we win. I have already played my part in it. What part? Strange said nothing more. The Space Stone opened the portal. Thanos stepped through without looking back, destination locked on a world he had not yet reached, and a stone he had not yet taken. And the portal sealed behind him the way dimensional barriers always sealed, instantly, completely, as if it had never been. Titan was rubble and silence. Tony at the edge of the field, the wound working through the suit seals. Star-Lord on his knees in the ruins, with the grief moving through him in a way that had no outlet. Mantis with her hand on Drax's arm, steadying. Nebula standing apart from all of them, already calculating the next point in her father's trajectory. Ben stood in the wreckage of the only plan they had executed, the Omnitrix cycling slowly from red through orange toward the beginning edge of green, and Strange's words sat in the space behind his eyes, with nowhere to settle. Strange had already played his part in it, which meant something else was still required. Tony was still bleeding. The nano-armor had tried to seal the wound automatically, tried and partially managed it. The blade from earlier in the battle had found a gap in the suit's coverage at the left side, below the ribs, and the seal had held until the recoil from Thanos' arm breaking their hold bent something inside the panel in a way that pressure seals were not designed to survive. Tony's internal readouts, as far as he could read them through the pain and the adrenaline still working through him, were inventorying the damage with the clinical precision of a system built to give accurate information about exactly how bad a situation is. The information was not encouraging. He had maybe 40 minutes before the partial seal failed completely. Ben, transformed, upgrade. The galvanic mechamorph form was nothing like what Tony had seen from the other transformations. No mass, no shell, no crystal geometry or four-armed muscle or any defined shape at all. What flowed out of the green light was liquid metal, dark and moving, a single glowing eye at its center, and it crossed the surface of the nano-armor the way Mercury crosses a tilted surface, with perfect adherence to what it found and perfect indifference to what it did not. The Mechamorph read the armor's internal architecture in the way a native reads their own language, immediately, completely, without apparent effort, and then began rewriting it. The damaged panel sealed from the inside, not patched. Restructured, the wound stopped bleeding because the suit's medical system, which had been offline since the blade hit, came online in the 6 seconds it took upgrade to locate and rewrite the managing protocols. It came online at 3 times its designed output capacity. Tony felt the pressure change instantly, the suit responding to inputs it had not been able to process 2 minutes ago, the diagnostic columns spiking to values he had never seen move that fast in real deployment. "That's my suit," he said, "and now it's better." The voice came from his own external speakers. The Mechamorph had chosen to route its communication through Tony's existing array rather than generating a separate source. It meant the form understood the architecture well enough to use it immediately, which meant it understood the architecture better than most of the engineers who had worked on it. He had designed every mark each one an iteration past the last, the product of every engineering hour he had accumulated since the cave. The notion that someone else's technology could walk into that work and improve it in 30 seconds was something he was processing, and the processing was going slowly, and he was aware that the processing was going slowly because some part of him was resisting the conclusion. He did not say any of this. He noted it, filed it, and kept his face neutral. Strange was sitting in the dust of Titan when upgrade reverted, not meditating, not calculating, or not visibly. The eye of Agamotto hung at his chest with the time stone absent from it, the geometric cavity where the stone had rested for years, catching the light of Titan's 2 moons in a way that made the emptiness more visible. He looked like a man who had already moved past grief about a loss and was simply managing the remaining implications. He looked at Ben. "When you try the form that terrifies you to use," he said, "and you will try it before this is over, remember that omnipotence in a universe not your own is not the same thing as omnipotence in your own. The rules are different here." Ben sat in the dust across from him. "What rules? Because whatever you save, with that form, this universe will collect an equivalent debt. It does not make exceptions for visitors. It does not negotiate the terms after the fact." "You sound like you've seen exactly what happens." Strange stood. He brushed the Titan dust from the red cape and looked at Ben with the expression of someone whose calculations were ongoing and private. "I have," he said, 140000605 times. He said nothing more. His part in the calculation was not finished. It would not be finished until it was no longer his to complete. Nebula was already at the Benatar when Ben reached the ship. The Guardian's vessel sat at the edge of the field where Rocket had set it down before the battle started, the hull marked from the initial engagement, but structurally sound. Nebula had her hand on the ramp and was running data with the focus of someone who has spent years inside a single mind and is applying that knowledge to predict the next 90 minutes of its trajectory. "The lost stone is in Vision's head," she said. "Wakanda, it is where your Avengers would place their most vulnerable asset. The Horde was already deployed there before we arrived here. My father will be through the portal and on that field within the hour. How far is Wakanda from here? Unreachable by this ship in time." Even at maximum rated output, Ben was already walking up the ramp. The Omnitrix was green. The decision happened in the space between Nebula's last word and his next step. Define maximum rated output. Rocket was in the cockpit when the Macamorph came through the primary hull junction and made contact with the engine block. Every instrument panel lit simultaneously. The nav system began rewriting itself around new power curves faster than Rocket's hands could interrupt any of it. The controls he had spent years learning like a second language being edited in real time by something that did not recognize his customizations as constraints worth preserving. "I just want it noted," Rocket said, at volume, to the general atmosphere of the ship, "that nobody asked me." Tony was in the co-pilot position, with his left arm held carefully level, watching his borrowed suit's readouts run numbers he had not programmed. Nobody ever asks the right people. The Benatar lifted. A journey measured in days became one measured in hours, the engines pushing output above their rated ceiling, because their rated ceiling had just been rewritten by something that considered the prior number a baseline rather than a limit. Ben sat against the hull wall back to the metal and looked at the Omnitrix. Nebula settled across from him. She had not spoken since the ship cleared Titan's upper atmosphere. When she did not soften the approach. "You have a form that could have stopped him." "Yes. Why didn't you use it?" Ben looked at the watch. The Omnitrix was green, and cycling through its standby pattern, cataloguing the universe around it the way it always did, offering everything it held without measuring the cost. That part had always been his job. It had never felt heavier. "Because there are 3 of us in there when I do," he said. "Me and 2 others. They have been part of that form longer than I have, and all 3 of us have to agree before anything happens, unanimously. Before any action is possible at all, and they didn't agree. I didn't try." He looked at the ceiling of the Benatar's hull, the scarred metal above him. "Strange told me not to. He said there was a cost, that this universe would collect a debt for whatever I saved, and I trusted him. For now, he was not certain that was right. The certainty would arrive later, when it no longer mattered which choice had been correct. He already knew that too, and it did not make the waiting easier. Bokunda came up through the Benatar's viewport from a distance and did not look like what Ben had been expecting. He had not known what to expect. He had been in this universe for less than 2 hours, and his frame of reference for planetary civilizations was the Galactic Plumber database and several years of non-consensual interstellar travel. But he had read the approach from altitude and formed an expectation anyway, and the expectation had been wrong. Wakanda was not a primitive settlement surrounded by forest. It was a civilization that had chosen, for reasons of its own, to appear like one, and that choice was now over. What held the outer perimeter was not a fence. It was a dome of contained vibranium energy, large enough to cover a city. And at its exterior, pressing inward from every compass point, was the Horde. "How many?" Ben said. The Nebula looked at the viewport with the expression she used when a number was accurate, but would not be useful. His armies do not count in tens of thousands, they count in millions. The dome was holding. The margin by which it was holding was shrinking. Tony had his hand at the comm before the Benatar began its descent. The frequency he pulled was active, ground level, which meant the man on the other end was still standing. "Steve." "New variable. He's not from here. Trust the watch." A pause on the other end. Cap's voice was level, in the way that voices go level when a situation has been bad long enough that adding one more unknown to it does not change the baseline. Can he fight? He just absorbed a Power Stone blast and handed it back. A shorter pause this time. "Then he's with us." The Benatar set down inside the dome perimeter, in a clearing that had been a landing approach 20 minutes ago and was now the edge of a defensive line. Ben came down the ramp and stopped. He had met Iron Man, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Nebula, and the Guardians. He had fought alongside them on Titan and spent 4 hours in a ship with several of them. He thought he had a reasonable sense of the scale of what this universe had assembled. He had underestimated. Captain America stood 30 feet away with a round shield on one arm and the bearing of someone who had decided at some prior point that he was not going to flinch at anything else today. Black Widow was at his left shoulder, no armor, no enhancements, moving with the economy of a person whose preparation had to substitute for everything she lacked. War Machine hovered above the near perimeter in armor that was clearly built to the same family of specifications as Tony's Mark 50. Heavier in the frame, the weapon's loadout visible from below. General Okoye stood at the inner barrier with the Dora Milaje arrayed behind her. Vibranium spears out, holding a section of the line that looked like it had been held the same way for hours. Bruce Banner moved inside the left edge of the perimeter, in a yellow and red suit, roughly the dimensions of a small building, the knuckles dented, and the left shoulder panel visibly repaired with field materials. At Vision's side, Scarlet Witch, her hands generating the low red current that meant she was spending power to keep something from getting worse. Vision himself was against a support pillar at the inner wall, upright but not entirely by choice, the Mind Stone in his forehead cycling between its usual gold and something dim and irregular that Ben did not like the look of, and coordinating all of it, moving between comm points with an authority that was not performed and not military in the conventional sense, but was absolutely functional. Black Panther, the king of whatever this place was, speaking in rapid, precise language to 3 different channels at once. Ben said, "Okay, a lot of people." "Hi." Black Widow looked at the Omnitrix. Stark said to trust the watch. "You got his comm from orbit." He was specific. She glanced at Tony as the armored figure came down the ramp behind Ben. He absorbed a power stone blast and handed it back. Those were his exact words. He would remember the details. Tony passing both of them toward the tactical center. "I also said, trust the watch, not canonize it. Let's keep moving." Ben crossed to where Scarlet Witch stood with Vision. The android's eyes tracked him as he approached, the awareness still present behind them, even if the power holding the body together was flickering. Ben crouched and looked at the Mind Stone, and the Omnitrix pulsed once against his wrist, in a way that meant it was trying to categorize what it was looking at, and arriving at nothing. "I can try to repair him," Ben said. "I have a form that can merge with technology. Read the architecture, rewrite the damaged. No." Scarlet Witch's voice was not angry, it was specific. "The stone is the problem, not the machine. You cannot upgrade what the stone is actively preventing." Ben looked at the Mind Stone. He looked at the Omnitrix. He understood what she was saying. The stone was not technology. It was older than the universe they were standing in, older than the species that built the Omnitrix, and it operated by rules that had preceded every framework the watch had been built to engage with. Upgrade could rewrite a nano-armor's medical protocols in 30 seconds. It could not negotiate with something that predated the concept of a protocol. He stood. "Then we have to stop him before he reaches this field." "We've been trying," she said. Her voice was careful about how much of what it held was audible. "For hours, the lightning came first. It was not the lightning of a storm, not lateral, not building from clouds. It came from directly above, a single vertical strike that hit the field outside the dome perimeter and scattered the Outriders in a 20-meter radius from pure electromagnetic discharge. Then the sound of it, arriving a fraction of a second, late in the way that sounds arrive when the thing generating them is moving very fast. Then the figure. Thor came down out of the sky with an axe in his hand that left a trail of residual lightning in the air where it had been, and he drove the axe into the earth at the dome's edge hard enough that the impact sent a shockwave through the soil in every direction. The Outriders closest to him broke off the line and ran. The ones that didn't moved back. The God of Thunder stood in the gap he had made and looked across the field at the people standing inside it. His eyes found Ben. Ben's eyes found him. "Okay," Ben said with genuine feeling. "That guy I would want on my team." Thor looked at Steve. "I see we have acquired another child. He staggered Thanos on Titan," Cap said. Absorbed a Power Stone blast and redirected it, 3 steps backward. Thor looked back at Ben. The attention shifted in a way that meant the assessment had changed. Thor had been to Nidavellir. Raz. He knew what it cost to contain raw cosmic energy in a mortal frame, because he had done a version of it himself, and it had nearly killed him. "You held Infinity Stone energy in your body," he said. "Different form. It's complicated." Something in Thor's expression shifted in a direction that was not quite a smile, and was not quite solemnity, and was somehow both at once. "I like him," he said to no one in particular. The dome shattered. Not a crack that widened. The vibranium energy barrier reached its threshold and came apart all at once, the way precision structures fail when they exceed their load. And the Outrider horde poured through the gap line at every point where the barrier had stood. Cap's voice went across every frequency. Avengers, assemble. Ben's hand was already at the Omnitrix. Here, oh, time. The dial turned. The Outrider horde had a logic to it. Not intelligence. There was nothing in the way those creatures moved that suggested individual thought, but a distributed pressure, the logic of a tide pushing until it found the lowest point in any barrier and flowing through it. Ben had 30 seconds of free fall from the dome's collapse to watch the pattern from Way Big's altitude before the first wave hit him. Way Big stood 100 feet tall on the Wakandan plain. The Outriders that reached the Tukustar's position hit him the way surf hits a rock formation, with enormous collective energy and no effect on the rock. Ben planted both feet in the vibranium-rich earth, felt the first impact surge across his legs and dissipate, and looked out at the number of them. Nebula had said millions. She had been accurate. He raised both forearms and crossed them, and a cosmic ray fired. The beam was cross-shaped, the intersection of two lines of cosmic energy released from the forearm structures, and where it swept the ground, it did not simply clear the targets in its path. It cleared them and the ground they had been standing on, and several meters of earth below that, cutting a corridor 300 yards wide through the center of the horde's advance, as cleanly as a blade through cloth. The aliens at the corridor's edges scattered, not because they had been told to, but because the surviving portion of their distributed logic had registered that the center was no longer an option. From somewhere in the battle line to Ben's left, Thor's voice rose above the noise with the unrestrained delight of someone for whom this kind of spectacle was a recognition rather than a surprise. Yes, now that is worthy. Cap's voice came across the comm. Tactical and immediate. Oko. Pull the flanking lines back 30 yards. The big one has the center. Stay clear of the beams. Cull Obsidian came through what remained of the advance from the western approach, moving at a speed inconsistent with his size, which was itself considerable. The Black Order's largest fighter hit Way Big in the left leg with a weapon arm that had been built to put things significantly larger than Hulkbusters on the ground, and the impact registered up the Tukustar's frame as a vibration rather than a stumble. Way Big looked down at him, then bent, caught the follow-up swing at the apex of its arc, and threw. Cull Obsidian crossed the Wakandan plain in a flat trajectory, skipped twice on impact with the earth, and came to rest at the tree line in a way that suggested the tree line had participated in the deceleration, whether it intended to or not. He got up, limping but up, which was more than Ben had expected, and Cull Obsidian was charging before the limp had finished establishing itself. Banner came in from the left. The Hulkbuster suit was running on maintenance power by this point, one shoulder panel held on by field materials, the right forearm section making a grinding sound with every movement that said several things about its internal integrity. Banner aimed the right forearm at Cull Obsidian's back, and fired the arm thrusters at full burn. The detached Hulkbuster forearm hit Cull Obsidian in the center of his spine and drove him forward into the vibranium energy barrier at the field's edge. The barrier was designed to discharge when breached. Cull Obsidian did not get up. "Nice shot," Way Big said, from 100 feet above the collision point. Banner's suit looked up at him. The visor had a crack across the left lens. "Don't get used to the altitude." Proxima Midnight was Wanda's fight, and Ben knew from the first second he tracked the engagement that Way-Big could not intervene without flattening the Allied line in the process. Wanda was outnumbered at her position, Proxima pressing hard, the chaos magic output splitting between containment and attack in a ratio that was not going to hold. Iron Man arrived at the right flank to even the odds. Ben watched the arithmetic shift. Wanda's telekinesis found an Outrider harvesting machine at the field's edge, one of the Black Order's mechanical assets, articulated and heavy, the kind of equipment designed to process organic material at industrial scale. She hit Proxima Midnight with enough force to carry her into it. The machine did what it was built to do. Proxima Midnight did not come out. Wanda turned her full attention back to Vision. Corvus Glaive was the problem. Way-Big scale could not reach. The assassin warrior was not large. He was not slow. He was carrying the specific blade that defeated Vision's intangibility, and he was moving through the combat perimeter with the patient precision of something that had been given one task and was executing it regardless of what else happened on the field. Ben tracked him from altitude. Corvus moved between combatants and around them, never engaging anything that was not between him and his target. Ben reverted. The Omnitrix flashed cooldown and Ben Tennyson hit the ground running, 60 yards from Vision's position, closing the distance as fast as 16-year-old legs could manage across a battlefield that had obstacles in every direction. 60 yards, 50, 40, 30. Corvus Glaive's blade slid between Vision's shoulder blades with the precision of someone who had practiced this specific strike. The Mind Stone in Vision's forehead flickered from gold to something dim and wrong, and Vision's knees gave, and the android that had been holding himself upright against the support pillar since Ben arrived on this planet came down. Ben reached the position at a dead sprint and arrived to Wanda Maximoff already there ahead of him, both hands forward, the chaos magic leaving her palms not in the controlled current it usually presented, but in the full, uncontained expression of what she was when she had nothing left to hold back. Corvus Glaive ceased to exist as a discrete entity in the space of 3 seconds. Wanda lowered her hands. She was looking at Vision and not looking at Ben. Ben crouched beside the android. The Mind Stone was still present, still in the forehead, still operational at some reduced level, the gold light returning slowly. But the blade had done what it was designed to do. Vision's intangibility was gone. His body had weight and density now in a way that he could not voluntarily disable, and whatever Thanos needed to take the stone from him, the blade had removed the one defense that made the extraction difficult. "We can still destroy it," Ben said. "The stone. Right now, before he gets here. If it's gone, there's nothing to take." Wanda did not look away from Vision. "He has the time stone. So he'll rewind time. He'll undo whatever we do, and he'll take Vision anyway. He has already done it." Her voice was careful, in a way that meant she was choosing each word specifically, to not say more than she meant to say. "There is nothing we can do about the stone. That is not where this ends." Ben looked at her. She was not guessing. She was not speculating about what Thanos might do in a hypothetical. She had already lived the version where she destroyed the stone herself, with her own hands, watching Vision die by her choice. And it had not mattered, and what she was doing now was managing the fact of that knowledge rather than discovering it for the first time. He stood. He had no answer to that. The universe's answer had already been delivered. Across the field, the Horde's pattern was changing. The leaderless portion was breaking. Outriders that had operated under the Black Order's direction scattering without the coordinating structure. Cull Obsidian was dead. Proxima Midnight was dead. Corvus Glaive was dead. The tide was losing its logic. For 30 seconds, the Wakandan defense held everything in front of it. Then the ground shook. Not from below. Not from the weight of the Horde or the impact of Way-Big's steps. From above, from the direction of the sky, from a point in the air above the field where the atmosphere had not done anything unusual 30 seconds ago. The sky tore open. He came from above, not from the direction Thanos had left, not through a ground-level portal, not arriving the way an army arrives, through a gap in a barrier. He descended from a point in the air above the Wakandan plain, the way a monarch descends a staircase. Deliberate, unhurried, each step lowering him through the sky, as if gravity were a protocol he had chosen to follow, rather than a law he was subject to. The space stone carried him down and sealed the rift above him as he landed. 5 lights glowed in sequence from the gauntlet: blue, yellow, red, purple, orange. One setting dark, one slot still waiting. He looked at the gauntlet and counted. "He's wearing 5 of them," Tony's voice, overcome flat and tight. We noticed. Thor went first. That. The Asgardian covered the distance between his landing point and Thanos in 2 seconds, with Stormbreaker already swinging for the chest, the shot that had nearly ended everything on Titan, the axe from a dying star. And Thanos caught the handle before it connected. The lightning that erupted out of the impact point was not Stormbreaker generating power. It was the energy discharged by the collision, arcing across the plane in every direction. Thanos shook under it, absorbed it, pivoted and threw Thor 30 yards across the Wakandan field. Thor hit the earth and was getting up before the dust settled, which was something, but he was getting up from 30 yards away, and that distance was the relevant fact. Cap was already moving. The vibranium shield hit the gauntlet's back edge, with the ringing impact of 2 extraordinary materials making contact, and the reverberation traveled up Cap's arm visibly. Thanos looked at him. Whatever the look contained, it was not contempt. "You have heart," Thanos said. He drove Cap into the earth with his free hand. Not the gauntlet, the free hand. Not killing, clearing. Scarlet Witch's power came in from above, the red cascade of it, enormous, even restrained, and Thanos pushed through it the way he pushed through everything, with the steady weight of something that has decided it is going to reach a particular point. Ben was transforming. Feedback materialized between Thanos and Vision's position. The conductoid's antenna tips crackled with the residual Power Stone energy Ben had held since Titan. Not much, not enough to matter on its own, but enough that when Thanos looked at the form, he recognized it. "You again, miss me?" Thanos raised the gauntlet. The purple stone. Not a wave this time, a controlled beam, precise and directed. The kind of output that said he was measuring something rather than destroying it. Testing whether the Titan result had been a function of Ben's form or a fluke of conditions. It was not a fluke. The beam hit feedback center mass and flooded in through every absorption node simultaneously. The conductoid's body lit with it, the antennae blazing, the stored Titan charge and the new input combining in the processing network and amplifying, each node feeding the next, the whole architecture of the form built for exactly this, for taking in and building and giving back more than it received. The nodes reached capacity and held for 1 second beyond it. And in that second, feedback glowed with the full concentrated output of a stone that could vaporize a moon. He fired it back. The return beam hit Thanos in the chest with measurably more force than Thanos had put into it, and the Mad Titan's boot heel scored lines in the vibranium-rich earth as the impact drove him backward. 1 step, 2, 3, 4 steps backward. On the Wakandan plain, with 5 infinity stones in his hand, the battlefield stopped. Not a command, not a signal. Every combatant on the Wakandan field registered the same thing in the same second. The Wakandan warriors, the Dora Milaje at the barrier line, the Avengers scattered across the plain, and they all stopped together without agreeing to. Thor, back on his feet 30 yards out, stood still. Okoye lowered her spear 1 inch. Even the remaining outriders, the ones that had not yet scattered, went still. Thanos, 4 steps backward. From somewhere on the ground to Ben's left, Thor's voice came quiet under the silence. The boy amplified it. Tony from the right flank, the voice of someone cataloging something while bleeding through his sealed armor. "Yeah, I saw." Thanos looked at feedback, not with anger, not with urgency, with the expression he reserved for things that had surprised him, which was not many things. He was interested. He reached for the red stone. The reality stone did not dissolve the next feedback blast the way it had on Titan. On Titan, he had used it as an override, turning the energy into harmless matter. Here he used something more economical. He bent the space between them. The return fire launched from feedback's hands, built and amplified the same way and curved. It missed by 8 feet, tracking wide in a graceful arc, and detonated against an empty section of the Wakandan plain with enough force to excavate a crater. Thanos turned away from Ben, not in retreat. He turned because the Mind Stone in Vision's forehead had just responded to the gauntlet's proximity, a pulse in the electromagnetic spectrum that only the gauntlet could read. And it told Thanos exactly. Ben's voice. "Hey, we are not finished." "Yes?" Thanos not looking back. "We are." For now, Ben hit the Omnitrix clockwork. The gear-driven robotic body materialized, and the time field expanded in the same motion, reaching for Thanos' stride mid-step, and it found purchase. Thanos decelerated visibly, his movement toward Vision slowing from a stride to something measured in inches per second. Thanos reached for the Time Stone. 2 forces in direct temporal opposition, the Chronosapiens field, derived from Galvan Prime's understanding of time manipulation as a biological architecture, capable of stopping or slowing time around individuals and objects in local space, and the Time Stone, a singularity that had existed before this universe, contained time to manipulate, that did not operate by the rules of any species biology, because it predated every biology that had ever formed. There was no contest in it. The Time Stone simply was more. Clockwork's field shattered. Not gradually, immediately, the way a structure fails when the load it's bearing exceeds what it was built to hold by an order of magnitude rather than a fraction. The Omnitrix sparked at the dial, the feedback of the Time Stone's dominant field running back through the transformation matrix, and Ben reverted, not because the Omnitrix timed out, but because the stone forced it. He hit the Wakandan earth in his hoodie and jeans, the Omnitrix locked in emergency recharge, and watched Thanos walk the remaining distance to Vision. Wanda stepped between them. Ben was 20 feet away. The Omnitrix was still locked. He crossed half the distance in the recharge sequence's first 3 seconds and stopped, because what happened next happened faster than his sprint could have altered. Wanda Maximoff destroyed the Mind Stone with both hands and everything she had. Vision's body went still around the absence of it. The light in his eyes went out. Thanos looked at the empty socket in Vision's forehead, the gold light gone. He raised the gauntlet. The Time Stone was yellow, and it did what the Time Stone did. It rewound. The 30 seconds before the destruction played back, and Vision's light returned, and the stone reappeared in his forehead, and Wanda's hands came apart from it as if the decision had never been made. Then Thanos reached in. The Mind Stone came free, 6 lights in the gauntlet. Now all 6, Thanos closed his fist. The gauntlet was complete. Wanda was on her knees on the Wakandan earth. Ben stood 20 feet away with the Omnitrix locked in cooldown, and there was nothing in the watch and nothing in him that had been fast enough, and the gauntlet was complete, and the universe had approximately 40 seconds to notice. The gauntlet was complete. Thanos stood in the center of the Wakandan plain with 6 stones, and no one left between him and the use of them. Thor was down, 20 yards out, pulling himself upright with Stormbreaker for a crutch. Cap was down. Scarlet Witch was on her knees at the place where Vision had been. The Wakandan defense had held everything this universe could throw at Thanos, and it had not been enough, and the surviving Avengers were distributed across the field like a sentence that had run out of arguments. Ben's hand was on the Omnitrix dial. He thought of Strange's voice, in the dust of Titan. The rules here are different. He thought of 14,605 possible paths, and a man who had watched every one of them and chosen to give the time stone away anyway. He thought of every person on the field and every person not on it, and the specific calculation that said half of all of them would cease to exist in the next 30 seconds. He pressed the dial. What happened next was not a transformation. The other forms had beginnings, a flash of green, a body reshaping, a recognizable sequence of biological information becoming a different kind of biological information. This had no beginning. Ben simply ceased to occupy the space where he had been standing, and what occupied it instead was something that defied the categories that the space had been operating by. A figure of absolute dark filled with stars, not the stars of this sky. Stars that did not belong to this universe's map, burning cold inside a form that stood 12 feet tall and was shaped only loosely like a person. Alien X, a celestial sapien. The species that had survived a universe being destroyed completely around it and then built a new one from the raw material of nothing. The battlefield stopped. Not Clockwork's field. There was no chronosapien physics in it, no temporal mechanism. It was simpler than that. Every person on the Wakandan plain stopped in the same instant, registering the same thing. Something was standing in that field that had no business being in any field, and the appropriate response was to stop and reassess what was possible. Thanos looked at Alien X. For the first time since Ben had been watching him across 2 planets and 1 dead world, the expression on the Mad Titan's face changed in a direction that was not calculation. It was carefully, deliberately neutral. The expression of a being of immense intelligence that has just encountered a data point it does not yet know what to do with. "What are you?" he said. Alien did not answer. Thanos brought the Power Stone up, full output, the same beam that had sent 4 arms through 3 levels of Titan ruin and had failed to hold 4 arms down, the beam that Ben had absorbed twice and redirected. It hit Alien X in the center of the star-flecked form and did nothing. Not absorbed, not redirected. It simply did not matter to the celestial sapien. The energy passed through the form's star map and dissipated behind it, like light through a gap in curtains. The reality stone, the ground beneath Alien X, bent inward in a localized gravity well. The well formed, strained against the celestial sapien's mass, and unformed Alien X did not shift its weight. Thanos lowered the gauntlet, quiet, looking. "Power," he said, "without will." He was right. He could see it, the stillness of the form, the absence of directed intent. Whatever Alien X was, it was not doing anything. Inside the void between the stars, Ben was shouting. The space inside Alien X was not dark the way rooms are dark. Not the absence of light, but the presence of something older than light. 2 voices existed in it, That had existed in it since before Ben had ever touched the dial, voices with more history in this form than he had years of life, and both of them were present, and neither of them was agreeing with the other. Bellicose, rage and aggression, the grinding certainty of force, was not subtle. Hastened with SSSS, stones and half, the universe in his fist. Erase him now. Serena, love and empathy, the specific and stubborn insistence on what harm does to the one who commits it, said with complete calm. If we erase him with a thought, we become the thing he believes he is. We become the arbiter of who lives and who does not. I will not be that. Serena, Ben. Her voice to him specifically. I am not afraid of dying. I am afraid of what we become if we decide it doesn't matter. Ben, peoply R-D-I-N-G. Right now, vote yes. Please, vote yes. Bellicose. Tend, what do you suggest? Tell me what you suggest. Serena. Serena, I am not saying do nothing. I am saying not this way. Not a thought that erases a mind. Find another way. There is no other. They were arguing inside the celestial sapien, with the specific and agonizing inefficiency of three minds that had never learned to agree quickly. In the time it takes a finger to close into a fist, they were still arguing. Outside, Thanos was walking. He stepped around Alien X. To the left, wide of the star form, unhurried, Alien X did not track him, could not track him. Could not move at all with the deadlock unresolved, could only stand in the space it occupied like a monument to the distinction between capability and direction. Thanos walked past it the way something walks past a statue. Power, he said to the air, without will. He looked at the gauntlet, he looked at his hand. Thor drove Stormbreaker into Thanos' chest from behind. The axe hit, not the glancing blow of deflection, not a partial strike, but the deep wound, the canonical wound, the blade finding the gap below the gauntlet arm and driving in with the full force of everything Nidavela's forge had built into that weapon. Thanos made a sound that was not a word. Blood. He staggered forward one step and turned his head partway, and looked at Thor with an expression that was pain, and something else, something older, the look of something that has accepted the possibility of this outcome and is not done yet. His fist closed, the gauntlet burned. All 6 stones fired simultaneously, and the light that resulted was every color at once, and no color. The visual representation of an event that was not designed for eyes to witness. The sound was not a sound, it was a cessation. A moment in which the usual noise of the universe was replaced by the universe, shifting its total weight in one direction by exactly half. Inside Alien X, the wave of it hit the celestial sapien form from the outside. Not the blast itself, but its consequence, the propagation of the snap's energy through the fabric of existence in this universe. Ben felt it as pressure against everything, against the universe as a thing with edges and contents, pressure that was also an accounting, the math of it moving through existence and making half of it not be. In the same instant, the snap fired. Serena and Bellicose were unanimous. The argument resolved, the way arguments resolve when the moment they were about has passed. Ben felt the consensus click into place and reached outward with the full will of 3 aligned minds and encountered the trailing edge of something that was no longer present. 1 second. Alien X reached for the snap 1 second after it had ceased to be reachable. The form reverted. Ben hit the Wakandan earth on both knees. The Omnitrix cycled red. Around him the dusting had already begun, not fast, then everywhere. Wanda Maximoff dissolved. Falcon, mid-stride, T'Challa at the perimeter edge, Bucky Barnes, Groot fragmenting in the wind, the Wakandan warriors in the citadel, the tree line, the plain, half of them at once, no pattern, no warning, no last moment to do anything with it. It happened, and then it was done, and the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the silence of arithmetic. Steve Rogers was on one knee in the center of the field. Thor had his axe in the earth and both hands on the handle, and was not looking at anything. Tony's voice somewhere on comms was asking for a status report and not getting one. The Snap's calculation had moved through this universe's life and taken its count. Ben Tennyson was not in that count. He had not been born in this universe. He did not belong to its tally of living things. The Snap's math ran on native population, and he was not native. And so he remained, kneeling in the ash of people he had spent the last several hours trying to protect, the Omnitrix cycling red on his wrist in the specific color it used when it needed more time than the moment was giving him. He was the only person standing who felt like he should have been able to stop it. He had been 1 second away from that being true. The silence came in the same instant the dusting stopped. This was the weight of the Wakandan plain, reduced by exactly half its participants in the space of a single breath. Not quiet so much as the specific absence of what had been there a moment ago. Empty armor, scattered weapons, a Wakandan spear dropped mid-throw, footprints going in a direction that no longer had someone making them. The Outriders scattered. Without the Black Order's direction, they ran into the forest with the unfocused energy of something whose purpose had been removed without explanation. They made noise going. The noise diminished. Steve Rogers went to one knee. Not tactical, not a fighting position. He had the shield's forearm edge planted in the Wakandan earth and his head down, and he was not getting up. And the Wakandans who remained standing did not speak to him about it because there was nothing that addressed it. Okoye stood at the inner barrier line with 6 of the Dora Milaje who were still present, and she was counting the people around her, and the count was not what it had been. Tony's voice came across the comm, status, anyone, silence. Anyone, Okoye said, half 10 seconds. Then Tony, say that again. Half, she said. Of everything we had, Thor moved. He crossed the field in a straight line that did not account for the objects in his path, stepping over and around them without looking down, and when he reached the center, he stopped. He had Stormbreaker in his hand. The axe had come back to him the way it always came back. It had come back to a hand that had put it in the wrong place. I went for the head, he said. To no one, to the field. I should have. He did not finish it. The axe had gone into the chest, with the full output of Nidavaleer's forge behind it. And Thanos had bled, and Thanos had closed his fist anyway. Thor had had the moment and the angle and the weapon, all of it aligned for the one action that would have stopped it, and he had chosen the chest. The chest had been wrong. He stood in the field and did not say the rest of the sentence. The rest of it would be with him a long time. Ben was standing where Alien X had stood. He had walked there without deciding to, the way people walk to the site of a thing they need to physically account for. The earth under his feet was not different from any other section of the plain. It should have been different. He looked at it and it was not, and that was worse. Tony found him there. The armored form was running at reduced output, the suit cycling through its careful post-battle economy. He looked at the Omnitrix. He looked at Ben. You had it, Tony said. I saw the form. Why didn't it? I was arguing with myself. Ben's voice was flat in the way voices go flat when there is nothing left to put behind them. The form has rules. There are 3 of us inside it, and we have to agree before anything happens, all 3, unanimously. And we didn't agree fast enough. The most powerful thing in your watch requires a committee vote. Yes, that's the worst design decision I've ever heard. I know. Tony was quiet. The engineer's mind was building toward something, and he kept it behind the faceplate. "Who designs it that way?" he said. "It's not a weapon." Ben said it without heat. "It's the most powerful living species in any universe. They built in the deadlock because they had to. Something that can unmake with a thought cannot unmake on impulse. One of them has to be the conscience. One has to be the rage. The one in the middle is the tiebreaker." He looked at the watch. I wasn't. Tony did not answer that. The Benatar's long-range sensors found Tony's suit signature first. Then Nebula's bioelectric field, the specific frequency of cybernetic architecture over surviving organic tissue. Both alive, both in Titan's gravity, while Tony's power reserves were at 11% and dropping. Rocket, 6 days. Maybe 4. That suit's efficient. The ship could not reach Titan in time. At rated output, Ben transformed. Upgrade moved through the engineering core the way it had the first time. Immediate read, the galvanic Mekamorph's architecture, treating the Benatar as a language it had already learned. It did not rebuild from the first modification. It found where that modification had ended, and located the headroom that remained above it. Power curves rewrote themselves in the nav console. Rocket sat in the pilot chair and watched his controls change, and decided not to touch them. "I needed noted," he said, "that I spent years learning this ship." The upgrade voice came from somewhere in the engine block. Noted. The Benatar lifted. Ben reverted in transit. He sat against the hull wall and let the Omnitrix cycle through its standby pattern, the cataloging function running its background processes, with the patient automation of something that had never stopped running since the day it was built. He shifted to feedback without a specific purpose. The conductoid's absorption nodes ran passive, antennae registering ambient energy the way skin registers temperature, not directing it, just aware. And in that passive register, something resolved. Not a large signal, a residual. A trace left in the absorption architecture from the specific moment in Wakanda when Alien X's field had made contact with the snap's propagation wave, while the snap was in progress. The celestial sapien form had been non-functional, still, a monument to 3 minds failing to agree. But the field had existed. When the combined stone energy washed through it, the absorption nodes had done what they always did. The Omnitrix had catalogued it. The watch always catalogued. Every environment, every energy type in range, continuous passive record, because the beings who built it understood that identification requires samples, and you cannot predict which one will matter. The snap's energy had hit the cataloging system during an active cycle, and the system noted it the way it noted everything else. It was not a reversal path. He could not undo the snap. The dusting was settled arithmetic, and this universe's accounting did not accept appeals. What he had was a recording. The specific combined stone energy signature of the snap in the Omnitrix's sample buffer, preserved with the fidelity of a system built to store DNA across 1 million species. Thanos would destroy the stones. He had said so. When that happened, the signature on Ben's wrist would be the only record in this universe of what those 6 stones had done together, the only surviving copy of the frequency that had remade the population of existence. Ben did not know yet what to do with this. He held it and did not file it away. Titan. Tony was at the landing zone when the Benatar came in. He had walked there, which meant the wound had held. Whatever upgrade had done to the suit's medical system on this field hours earlier had survived a prolonged battle and a gauntlet strike faceplate up. He watched the approach vector with the expression he used for things he needed to pretend he was not relieved to see. Ben came down the ramp. "You would have run out of air in 6 days, Tony, for the suit's efficient." Nebula was behind him. She boarded without ceremony, without looking at Ben. She had been standing at the field's edge since the snap, looking at the sky, and she had the expression of someone who has finished processing a calculation and is waiting for others to catch up. "Do you know where he went?" Ben said. "Yes." She stopped at the top of the ramp. "He always said that when the work was done, he would sit down, that he would find a quiet place and watch the sun rise. He told me this when I was small and he was teaching me what he believed the universe required of him." She did not turn around. He called it the garden, the ramp sealed. The Benatar lifted from Titan's dead surface and set course, the engines running above the ceiling they had been built with, carrying 3 people and the one piece of information the surviving Avengers would eventually need: the garden. Specific coordinates, held inside one woman's memory. She had spent her entire life as a tool in the hands of the man who had just remade existence, and she was still standing, and she knew where he went when the work was done. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Earth looked wrong from the air, not destroyed. That was the first thing Ben noticed coming in from Titan's orbital approach on the enhanced Benatar with Tony at the co-pilot station and Nebula in the rear. No visible impact craters, no burning cities, no structural damage of the kind that signals an active conflict. The planet was whole, the geography was intact. From altitude it looked like the Earth it had always been. It was the motion that was wrong. A highway network that should have carried a steady current carried half that, and some of what remained had drifted sideways. Cars at angles to their lanes stopped, the drivers no longer present. Fields held cattle in clusters with gaps between them larger than a healthy herd made sense. A flock of birds wheeled in a formation that kept tightening and resettling, the pattern of a group arriving at the same wrong count. He had seen alien invasions. He had seen worlds reshaped by singular powers. He had never seen anything like this. Not a world destroyed, but a world halved, without a mark on it. The snap's arithmetic had been precise and clean, and it was the precision that was difficult. Destruction left evidence. This left half of everything still standing, going about the business of still standing, in a world that was audibly quieter than it had been 3 days ago. The Avengers compound was still functional. The surviving members had assembled there. Not many, not enough. The roster reduced by the same half that the world was, and the operational framework that Steve Rogers had apparently decided was not going to stop running even now was the thing that kept the space from being just a building full of people who had lost. Tony went quiet for the descent. The wound was sealed, the suit running at full medical capacity. Whatever was happening behind the faceplate, he had filed it where he filed things he was not ready to examine. Ben brought the Benatar down, and they disembarked into a world that smelled like late autumn and grief. Tony found Ben at a window seat in the compound's lower corridor 2 hours after they landed. He had the look of someone who had been deciding what to say and had arrived at a version he considered sufficiently exact. "You had a form that could have stopped him," Tony said. "You said it yourself. Invulnerable to the stones. Stands there, and nothing touches it. Yes, and you waited." Ben looked at the window. "Strange told me the cost was. Strange is gone. Not cruel. Exact. His calculation got half the universe killed." His calculation might be why there's anyone left to have this conversation. Ben did not raise his voice. The argument was not new to him. He had been having it with himself since Wakanda. He said there was one path, one out of 14 million. He said he had already played his part. That means he saw what using Alien X would cost and decided, for reasons I don't have, that not using it was the right call. That's a lot of faith in a man who handed the time stone to the being he'd sworn to protect it from. Yes, Ben looked at his hands, and I know that if Strange was wrong, then I failed. I had the form, and I didn't try, and half of everything alive is gone because of it. He paused. But I also know that the one time I did try in Wakanda, the form locked up 3 minds arguing and the snap fired. Anyway, so even if Strange's calculation was wrong, I'm not sure I would have been fast enough. Tony was quiet for a moment. You're not sure? I'm not sure. Another moment. I don't like not sure. Neither do I. Ben met his gaze. But I'm not going to tell you I'm certain when I'm not about this. Tony studied him the way he studied things he had not yet arrived at a working model for. Then he walked away, and the conversation was over. And it was the kind of over that meant it had been heard. Steve found Ben outside on the east edge of the compound perimeter, where the ground was still and the half-empty tree line stood in the October light without making a sound. Steve Rogers had not stopped moving since they landed. He had been coordinating what remained of the team, running search and rescue in the nearest population centers, cataloging the infrastructure that had failed when the people running it disappeared, finding the work and doing it, because the alternative was to stop, and he had decided at some prior point not to stop. He sat down next to Ben without preamble. Strange said there's one way to win, he said. He didn't say it was easy. He didn't say it was fast. He didn't say much of anything, Ben said. He just gave Thanos the stone and looked at me like I was supposed to understand. Did you? I understood that he'd made a choice. I didn't understand why it was the right one. Ben looked at the tree line. I still don't completely. Neither do I, Steve said, but I know that he watched every possible version of this and chose the one where he gave it up. That means something. He paused. We don't stop. Whatever comes next, we don't stop. Ben looked at him. Steve Rogers was not offering comfort. He was not managing Ben's feelings or providing reassurance in the form of information. He was stating a fact about what Steve Rogers was going to do, regardless of the answer, and offering it as something Ben could attach to if he wanted. How long? Ben said. I don't know. Steve stood, but not forever. Nebula had been working a terminal in the compound's secondary operations center since they landed. Not eating, not sleeping, running data with the focus of someone who has been given a problem they know the answer to and is doing the specific mathematical work of proving it. She found Ben and Tony and Thor in the main briefing space and put coordinates on the screen. The garden, she said, a planet he chose before the snap, before any of it. He told me once that he had a place where he would go when the work was finished. I cross-referenced the stellar cartography he showed me as a child with a Benatar's existing charts. She did not explain how she had learned stellar cartography as a child, and no one asked. He is here. Ben looked at the coordinates. Then at Thor, who was looking at them with the particular stillness he had brought back from Wakanda, the stillness of a person who had had the correct answer in his hands and had made the wrong choice with it. How many of you are going? Ben said. All of us, Steve said. That is not a question. I want to get there first. He said it before he had fully decided to say it, which meant it had already been decided at a level that was not waiting for the rest of him alone, before anyone brings weapons. Thor looked at him. You want to have a conversation with the man who just erased half the universe. He's the only one who knows why he did it, Ben said, and I want him to say it to my face, not to a battlefield, not while someone's axe is already swinging. I want to hear the argument from the person who made it, and I want him to hear what I think about it. He looked around the room. Then you can all do what you're going to do. No one agreed. No one disagreed in a way that stopped him. Thor looked at Steve. Steve looked at Nebula. Nebula looked at the coordinates on the screen with the expression she used when a plan was proceeding in a direction she had anticipated. Ben was in XLR-8 form before he reached the landing bay. The max-speed legs covered the compound interior in 4 steps and took the Benatar's ramp in 2 more, and he was in the cockpit and lifting before the rest of them had finished their conversation. The enhanced engines ran the numbers for the garden's coordinates and gave him a transit time. 12 hours ahead of whatever was behind him, he sat in the pilot seat in a Canis Celeron's body and looked at the stars ahead. He was going to ask Thanos to explain it, in person, without the gauntlet between them. He did not know if it was the right move. Strange had said, "The cost of omnipotence in a universe not your own was not the same." Ben had taken that as a warning about Alien X. He was starting to think it was a warning about something broader. The stars moved. The Benatar ran toward the garden, alone. The garden was quiet, the way places are quiet when they have never held very much noise, amber fields under a low sun. 2 small moons on the horizon, one ahead of the other, both pale and close, their light soft enough that it did not compete with the sun so much as accompany it. The air moved at the pace of something that had decided not to be in a hurry. Ben landed the Benatar at the field's edge and stood on the ramp for 3 seconds before he stepped off, because the figure sitting in the grain 50 yards away was visible from where he stood, and the figure was not moving, and he wanted to account for that before his feet touched the ground. Thanos sat at the field's center on the earth itself, not a seat, not a throne. The grain rose on all sides of him and moved in the still air, and his left hand rested in front of him. The stones were dim, not absent, still set in their slots, but dim in the specific way of power, spent so completely that the emptied vessel was recognizable for what it held. His armor was not present. Not surrender. The decision of a being who had completed the work and was no longer in the mode that required armor. He watched Ben cross the 50 yards to 30 feet. He did not stand. "You came alone," Thanos said, without the stronger forms. "I wanted to talk, not fight." "Then talk." "You held the star body in Wakanda," Thanos said. "When I completed the gauntlet, it stood there, and the stones reached it and found nothing to press against. I was arguing with myself about whether killing you was worth becoming you." The Titan looked at him with the patience of something that had heard this category of objection before. "And the answer is that you're wrong." Ben held eye contact. "Not about resources, not about the math of scarcity. I understand the math. I've been to worlds with finite resources and infinite need. But you were not asked. You chose who lives and who dies without asking anyone who was going to die. The universe did not ask Titan's children before it imposed scarcity on them." The voice was what it always was, steady, unhurried, the register of something that had already done the math and arrived at its conclusion long ago. "I watched my world choose its own end, every resource consumed. Every life in conflict with every other for what remained. I proposed a solution. They refused it. Titan collapsed, Half could have lived. All died. A pause. I carry that, and I decided that what I carry should not be carried alone. And so you decided to do it to everyone else. For everyone else. I've been to worlds on the edge of collapse, Ben said. I've met species that found the solution without killing half of what lived on them. Sharing, cooperation, changing how they use what they have. None of them needed what you decided everyone needed. You are describing outcomes. Species that exist because someone else made the harder choice somewhere in their history. You describe the result, not the mechanism. You're describing murder and calling it a mechanism. I am describing sacrifice. Ben looked at the gauntlet, at the 6 dim settings. You sacrificed Gamora, your daughter. The thing you loved most. And this universe told me the deepest power costs you the thing you love. I heard that. I understand it. He paused. But you didn't make that sacrifice so others could live. You made it so you could have the power to make a choice for everyone else. That is not sacrifice. That is theft. The grain moved. Thanos looked at the horizon and said nothing for several seconds. Someone had to. Ben's voice was flat in the way that means certain rather than controlled. They didn't, and that is the difference between us. I've had the power to make choices for entire species about who lives and who doesn't. I have never made them, because the moment I do, I am not a hero. I am just a bigger tyrant with better intentions. Thanos was still. He had heard the argument. He had assessed it. The conclusion he arrived at was not the one Ben had offered, and he was done with the conversation. He raised the gauntlet. Ben moved. The Omnitrix hit upgrade before the thought was complete, the mechamorph form flooding out of the green light toward the gauntlet with the full processing speed of galvanic architecture, reaching for something it could read and interrupt. And the stones flared. All 6 at once, the dim reversing in an instant, the spent power cycling back for one final directed expenditure. Not a beam. Not an outward fire aimed at anything in the field. The flare turned inward, stone against stone. The gauntlet aimed at itself. Power fed into power, at the direction of a being who had decided that the work he had accomplished could not be allowed to be taken back. A sound like a chord played in a language that does not exist anymore. Upgrade reverted. Ben hit the ground in his hoodie. The stones were gone. Thanos lowered the gauntlet. What remained of it scorched, the stone settings empty, in a way that was different from anything they had been before. Darker than absence. He was not well. The act had cost him in the register of physical capacity, a being of immense strength operating now at a fraction of it. The double cost of the snap, and the destruction sitting visibly on him. I used the stones to destroy the stones, he said. It nearly killed me, but the work is done. It always will be. He looked at the gauntlet in the way you look at a thing you are finished with. I am inevitable. Now, I have nothing to protect, Ben said. He dialed the Omnitrix. The garden's horizon changed. 100 feet of Taku star rising in the amber light blocked one of the moons entirely and threw a shadow across the grain field the length of a city block. Waybig stood with both forearms raised and looked down at the figure in the grain with the particular quality of attention that belongs to something 100 feet tall regarding something that is not tall. Ben did not aim the cosmic ray at Thanos. He aimed it at the earth 20 feet in front of him. The beam hit, and the impact threw the Titan backward into the grain without contact, the shock wave doing the work cleanly. The crater it left was 12 feet deep and the width of a building, a containment, a border. You are not going anywhere while I am standing here. Thanos rose from the grain. Damaged, depleted, the gauntlet dead on his ruined hand. He looked up at the full height of the Tukustar above him, and his expression was the expression of a being with no remaining weapons, confronting something considerably larger than the being with no remaining weapons. "You won't kill me," he said. "You have made that perfectly clear." "No way," Big said, from 100 feet above the garden's grain. "But they will." The Benatar broke atmosphere above them. Thor did not wait for the ship to land. He dropped from the open bay with Stormbreaker in his hand, the fall bringing him down fast toward the garden world with the axe held correctly. Angled for the approach, he landed between the crater's edge and where Thanos stood. The impact shook the ground. He looked at the Titan, at the dead gauntlet, at the open field. "I went for the chest last time," he said. He did not make the same mistake. Ben reverted. He stood in the grain field in his hoodie, with the Omnitrix cycling through its cooldown, and looked at the fallen gauntlet and the empty settings in it, and he understood precisely what the conversation had cost. The stones were gone. The snap stood. The half-empty universe had no immediate path to reversal. The stones were the only instrument capable of undoing their own work, and Thanos had unmade them in the minutes the conversation took. Whatever path might exist from here was distant, theoretical, unformed, not nothing, but not close. Cap came to stand beside him, not because he had answers, because Steve Rogers had the practice of standing beside people who were carrying something, and he had correctly identified the weight. "You couldn't have known," he said. "No." Ben looked at the empty gauntlet on the grainfield earth. "But I could have been faster." He did not say he was wrong to talk first. He was not certain he was wrong. But he was going to carry the fact that the choice had a cost, and the cost was real, and the carrying of it was not optional. The Avengers assembled around him in the grain. The garden's 2 moons had cleared the horizon. The air still moved at its unhurried pace, indifferent to what had happened in the field beneath it, the way quiet places are indifferent to the events that occur in them. The work was done. The stones were gone. They did not bury anything on the garden. Thanos had built no monument there, and they gave him none. The grain field was what it was, a place he had chosen for its quiet, and they left it to the quiet. The Benatar lifted from the amber soil, and the 2 small moons fell away behind them, and the only mark left on the garden was the crater way Big's cosmic ray had driven into the grain. 30 feet deep, visible from the ship's lower viewport for 12 seconds before the distance took it. The flight home was silent, not the silence of people with nothing to say, the other kind. Earth came up through the viewport, the same way it always came up when someone who had been away long enough returns. More beautiful than memory, more fragile than it looks from the surface, the blue and white of it making the same argument it always made about why it was worth protecting. Half empty now, the argument still stood. Tony found Ben in the compound's lower corridor. In the late afternoon, he sat across from him with the suit absent and said what he had decided to say. "I built a suit in a cave, out of scraps. Whatever reversal looks like from here, I will find it. I have done more with less." "Strange said there's one path," Ben said. "Strange is gone. I'll find my own." Tony looked at his hands. "At the Omnitrix? You staying?" Ben looked at the watch. "I can't get home. The rift that brought me here closed during the snap. Whatever alignment carried me and realigned when the stones fired." He paused. "So yes, I'm staying." Tony nodded. The nod of someone incorporating accurate information. "Then we have time to work the problem," he said. The roof of the compound faced west. and Steve Rogers had been standing on it long enough that the sky above him had moved from late afternoon through its first shade of evening. He was watching the tree line and the sky above it, and he had the stillness he sometimes carried, the stillness that said he was not thinking about the view. Ben came to stand beside him. "Strange said there's one path to win," Cap said. He had said this before. He was not repeating it for Ben's benefit. He was saying it in the way people say things they are deciding to keep believing. He didn't say it was pretty. He didn't say it was fast. 5 years, Ben said. He did not ask where that number came from. It was in the shape of the problem, in the math of what would need to happen for the stones to be reachable again. He could not see the mechanism yet, but the figure felt right in the way that figures sometimes feel right before you understand them. Cap looked at him. "You're staying. I can't go home." The rift closed. Cap absorbed this. "Then I can't leave them either, any of them, not while half the world is still there and still needing someone." "Then I'll stay too," Ben said. It was not triumphant. It was the specific form of decision that happens when the situation has already decided for you, and you arrive at a moment of accepting it. Ben Tennyson, 16 years old, from the wrong universe, stranded by the snap's restructuring of reality, choosing to be where he was needed instead of mourning where he could not reach. The Wakandan Overlook existed at the edge of the rebuilt outer perimeter, a raised platform of stone that looked out over the tree line and the plain beyond it, and at this hour, most of the sky. Ben sat at its edge in the dark and looked up. Half the stars were wrong, not visibly wrong, not rearranged or missing in patterns the naked eye could detect. But some percentage of the lights above him corresponded to systems that had lost half their populations in the same instant the Wakandan plane had, and some percentage of those systems had included enough people that the absence was real and specific and enormous. The sky looked the same. It was not the same. The Omnitrix pulsed against his wrist, green, steady. The cataloging function never stopped. It ran continuous passive record as a baseline operation, noting what was around it with the automated patience of something built to notice everything, because the beings who built it understood that you cannot predict which observation. The snap's energy signature was in there. Filed. Preserved. The combined stone resonance of the thing that had halved the universe, sitting in the sample buffer at the same fidelity as 1,000,000 alien DNA sequences, because the watch had been present at the moment the snap fired and had done what it always did. He looked at the green light. He did not know yet what to do with the record he was carrying, but he knew it was real, and he did not let himself forget it. Somewhere in the space between realities, moving at the speed that dimensional signals travel when the device generating them is built by the most intelligent being in 5 galaxies, a beacon was pulsing. The Omnitrix reported home. It always reported home. That was a baseline function, not a special mode. The locator signal ran as long as the device was active, because Asmuth had built it to be findable in any environment it was taken into. The Omnitrix had been taken into a universe it was not built to enter. The signal had been pulsing since Ben arrived. It would reach its receiver eventually. The gap between universes was a distance, not a wall, and the signal knew how to cross distances. Asmuth would receive it. He would know what it meant. The device was present and active in an environment its logs did not contain. He would begin the calculation that followed from that. Whether he would act on it was not knowable from here, but the signal was going, and it would arrive. And beyond the signal, in the spaces between realities, where things with long patience had been noting the condition of the barriers between universes for longer than any individual universe had existed, something had noticed something. The snap's energy had propagated outward, through the dimensional skin of this universe into the adjacent space where realities press against each other. Those ripples were readable if you were old enough to read them. They had noted the snap. Singular events of that magnitude left marks that was not unprecedented. What was unexpected was the figure at the epicenter who had not dusted. One being, standing in the residue of a snap that had reached the full census of universal life, and the math had moved through and left him, not immune to it, not counted by it, not native to the universe the stones had been built for, not in the ledger the arithmetic was drawn from. Visible in the data in a way beings from outside were not supposed to be visible. They had not considered that before. They were considering it now. Ben sat on the overlook edge and did not know that anything was considering him. He was looking at the Omnitrix. The green light pulsed. Bellicus and Serena were still in there, in the space between transformations, in the star-filled dark that was Alien X's interior, still arriving at the moment 1 second too late where they had all agreed. He could feel the shape of that argument the same way you feel. A word you cannot quite remember, present, not accessible, the knowing of a thing without the thing itself. 1 second, and everything changes. He sat with that. The Omnitrix pulsed. He straightened. He was here. He was staying. Whatever came next was going to need someone with a watch that could do a million things. And the watch was on his wrist, and the person wearing it had decided to be exactly where he was. The green light held steady in the dark above the plane. Now that we've watched an entire universe get half erased, and the one kid who could have stopped it spend 3 chapters arguing with himself about it, your turn. Which character do you want to see finally cut loose in a universe that absolutely cannot handle them? And where in the world are you watching this from? Drop both in the comments. I read every single one. If you want more crossovers like this, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't